When you get out into the woods, you've got two really important tools you carry with you all the time, and they're the kind of tools that you don't lose easily, but you can if you're not careful. And those tools are your hands, these babies right here. These are the things that make it possible for you to manipulate your environment. So that means that you got to protect these tools somehow. And how do you do that? Well, the best way, of course, is to wear gloves when you're out in the woods. Now, some folks don't like to wear gloves, and there's a good reason for that. When they're handling things, they can't feel through the tips of their fingers when they got big old gloves on. The tips of the gloves stop you from grabbing things real easily, so they get in the way. But still, these gloves protect your hands. They protect more than just your fingers. They protect your palm and so forth, which is one reason why a lot of folks go over to these little shorty gloves for wilderness use, something like that. Some people just call these fingerless gloves because they don't have any fingers. You can see that these kind of gloves will protect the palm of your hand, so you could pick things up, hot pans or whatever. They keep your hands fairly warm, protected from abrasion and cuts in this area and the back of your hand. And all around they're a good hand protection. You still have these fingers for fine manipulation of objects in your environment. Now, these kind of gloves here, these little fingerless gloves, if I can get them off, cost a pretty penny. Believe it or not, they're more expensive than regular gloves. But still, people go out and they spend 20 some odd dollars for a pair of these. Well, this here is one of my old gloves. And let me show you the quickie trick for saving yourself some money. Duh. Now, I want you to know that a lot of folks don't even think about this. They go, oh no, you know, those are my gloves. Well, these are a pair of gloves that I've worn holes through the fingers. So, by the way, these gloves here cost me about $10 or $12, and they get a second use now as fingerless gloves, just by cutting off the fingertips on that. Now you got these little pieces of leather, you could stick them back on like that. But the idea is you can save a lot of money sometimes. Just go out and buy yourself a pair of gloves that fit pretty good, and cut the fingers off, and you got your fingerless gloves. Good and handy. Now, in the different Woodsmaster videos, you've seen a pair of gloves, and I've had a lot of questions about these things over the years. People say, where do you get these things? What are they? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to get that off. That's these things here. This is a kind of a special glove, and when I was working down in South America, I picked this pair up. These are sometimes called stevedore gloves. And again, they're a fingerless glove. What they do is they got a little flap here that protects your hand, double thick layer of leather, and of course your fingers are poking out, and you could do all kinds of stuff. And in some of the videos you've seen me making arrowheads on the palm and so forth. But there's better designs than this one here, and I'm going to show you one of those designs. But before we get into that, I want to show you something else. These things don't have to be complicated when you make them. This is something I made out of a piece of junk leather, and basically all this is a hand wrap. Now you can see there's a little hole for the thumb that sits there. You just wrap a piece of leather around like so, and then I got a couple of cords that I can tie off, but it protects the palm, protects the wrist a little bit, keeps your hand a little bit warmer, and all it is a strip of leather with a hole for your thumb. That's how simple these things can be, but they will protect your hands. Well, let's get on to making a pair of real fingerless gloves, something that you can make and take to the woods, and something you'll probably enjoy. I'm going to use my Tops Magnum folder for this project. When you go to make your pattern, the first thing you want to do is make sure you take off the whatever rings or things might affect your drawing. Now what I want to do is I want to have a tall flap of leather that it's going to flop over my knuckles to give them some protection. And this leather up in here, this area, is going to be the part I use. Let me show you what I mean. What you want to do is you want to start out with a drawing of your hand. So just try to give yourself a rough drawing of where everything is on your hand, like so. About like that. Now that's your basic pattern. Now, where does your hand go? Well, where are the finger holes? It's going to be, of course, on the fingers. Now, here's how we start this out. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a circle right where that finger is. and a circle about that. Don't worry too much about the size of these. Just make sure your circles are about 1/8 of an inch or maybe a little more apart. You don't want too much leather between your fingers or it starts to get annoying. And one for that. So this is the basic outline. Now when I put this on here originally, I lined it up with my upper knuckles, and that's going to be the top of my pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of taper this down and out like so, and I'll taper this side down over the top of my thumb. So it looks about like that. That's basically the design we're working with. Now when it comes down to doing the thumb, you kind of want to mark about where your thumb is coming through. And the flap for the thumb is going to need to face up into the palm of your hand. That's going to make more sense in a minute. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line and then make a hole that matches that line. This is where my thumb is going to come through. The pieces I cut out of here are only going to come out partially, like so that there's going to be a flap that drops down. Now it's easier to see if I go ahead and cut the pattern out, and then you can tell exactly what I'm doing. Now that I've cut the pattern out, you can see a little bit more about what's going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and test fit my fingers in these holes, like so, just to make sure everything's in the right spot, like that. You can see these little flaps of leather here. I leave those on because those are going to be inside to help protect the lower part of my fingers. They're just little flaps, and eventually you may want to cut them off or not. Doesn't make any difference, but this thumb flap is kind of important, and it lays over the palm right in there. But this is the pattern that I'm going to be cutting from now. So what I need to do is to transfer this pattern to a piece of leather and start making my gloves. A quick tip: this pattern is going to be useful for both hands, and this one is going to be, I just did this for my left hand, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that this is the inside of the left hand. The leather we're going to be using is the same stuff we've used for several of our other projects, including the big parka that Karen made for me in the solo video. So it's a good full grain deer hide. Now I want the outside, or the skin side of the hide, facing out on this glove. I want the smoother velvety side here facing in towards my hand. This gives me the tough outer section facing the things that are going to be hitting these gloves. So I'm going to lay it out so that the outside now is facing down just as it is on the pattern. Something else I want to do on this. This part here is going to flap back over the knuckles, and I want to add a little bit more to it. You'll see more of that in a minute. So I'm just going to leave another, oh heck, I'll leave a little more than that on there. I'm going to leave another inch or so on top. So I'll just go ahead and line this out. Of course, all my drawing now is taking place inside the part that's going to be away, the part that's not going to be visible on the outside. Now this is my big flap here. I'll bring it down and pick up the same tapers. Once that's on there, I'll just go ahead and draw where the finger cutouts are. Now remember, leather stretches a little bit. So if they're a little bit tight, that's okay. And you got to remember that this flap here is going to be facing in towards the fingers. So that's the basic pattern for the glove. That's all there is to it. So we'll go ahead and cut that out and see what we've got. Now that I've got a kind of a palm cover going on here, and I've got my finger holes and my thumb hole cut out, we're going to make this thing fit the hand. Now what I want from this glove is I want it to give me a little bit of wrist support, and I want this leather to come back on my hand, and I want it to join kind of at the midline of my hand, right in the back here, on this here. So I'm going to cut a little bit of leather off of this flap here because it goes over too much. And we'll just figure that out. I'm just going to make a little dot so I know about where to cut it. This is about the middle of my hand and right about there. And I'll just slice that off. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. About the midline of my hand, which is about here and about here. I'm going to cut this piece off. And what will happen then is these two pieces will join at the center, and I'm going to put some lacing right up the middle. What I've done now is I've trimmed it a little bit so it's not quite touching, well, I guess it is touching down the midline of my hand. And remember, this is done right on your hand because you don't want to try and make a pattern for this. This is with the leather. So it's going to get laced up right here. So we'll go ahead and cut some lacing holes, or punch some lacing holes in here and lace it up, and I'll show you the next step. I've just gone ahead and folded the two halves here over each other, and I'm going to punch those little lacing holes about a ½ inch or so apart, and in about 1/3 of an inch. I'm just going to use some paracord to lace that thing up. Later on I'll switch over to leather. Just melt the end of it and draw it out a little bit. Now that it's laced up, I'm going to go ahead and make the knuckle protection, and that's this extra flap up here. What will happen is I'm going to fold this down and punch a couple holes to pick up the top lace, so it'll lay down against my hand like that. But basically, there's a hand protector right there, kind of like a little glove, and I can use this one here when I'm finished with it to make the other hand. So let's go ahead and finish this up. First thing I'll do is mark where I need to punch my 2 holes to hold the flap down. Now that the flap is stitched down, what I'll do is I'll take this extra material here and just trim it off like so. What we'll do is we'll come back later, or I can anytime I want, and I can stitch this down if I feel like it. There we go.